the British. But from the strictly American limited point of view, that was that. But you'll find also, incidentally, in volume 2 of this, when we meet next September, we'll be talking about Pearl Harbor, because we've got some very good, very interesting new material on Pearl Harbor, which again purely shows up the other academic historians through whose hands this material has gone, but they haven't spotted it. Yes.
The rationalization, as I understand it, of the United States during World War I was the torpedoing of the Lusitania.
Yes.
There was a program, there was a series on American television a few years ago called Churchill, and by Leonard Nimoy was the narrator. I don't know if you've seen the particular one. But the Lusitania was known to be carrying war material. The Germans posted signs all over New York saying, don't travel on a torpedo,
Yes.
it's illegal. It was, according to the program, it was taken to Britain, and the destroyer escort was pulled off. It was allowed to go south of Ireland, where the German Wolfpack was known to be
Yes.
there to torpedo the boat. They had a sister ship, which had also been torpedoed, but did not blow up and sink. And it looks like a setup.
Yes.
And the respective secretaries of the navies were Franklin Delano Roosevelt for the United States
And Winston Churchill.
Churchill for Britain. Were you aware of this?
Oh yes, well aware of this, but of course, to say that the United States came into the Second World War because of the Lusitania incident, that was just a very small trigger which is needed to dupe public opinion, just like Pearl Harbor. You need things like that to gull the public into getting as mad as hell. And Churchill was very good at that. In fact, in World War II, as you'll find from this volume, he used his knowledge of the German U-boat positions. He knew exactly where the German U-boats were from the code-breaking operation. And he used his knowledge of that to make sure that American convoys were routed right into the path of the German U-boats at the time before Pearl Harbor, so that he was trying the whole time to get the Americans into the war by tricks like that. The Lusitania episode hasn't been entirely satisfactorily cleared up. The wreckage, I think in that TV program you're talking about, the wreckage was actually investigated by underwater camera, and it was found that recent work had been done on the underwater wreck to remove certain gun mountings and things. And the Admiralty in Britain was very angry that the television cameras were allowed near this. So there's a lot still unexplained about that. But it would be wrong to imagine the Americans just come into war because of the Lusitania or the sinking of Roosevelt. In September 1938, when he was asked by one of his cabinet, is the Czech crisis dangerous for the United States or good? Roosevelt's reply, which I quoted in this book, I think, quoted by the Secretary of the Interior, Ickes, his diaries in the Library of Congress, Roosevelt replied, any war or any crisis in Europe at this moment can only benefit the United States. Already the gold of the European nations is flooding across the Atlantic at a rate so fast that we don't have enough warships to carry it. And that's the real reason why wars get fought. Economic reasons and trade reasons. And I've never seen that particular quotation referred to anywhere else, and mine is the first book to use it, possibly because the Ickes diary, you've got to read 13 or 14 microfilms of diary pages until you get to little nuggets like that. Yes?
I want to know what the story is on Everett, the former Prince of Wales. Didn't he want to, after the war started, didn't he want to see Hitler to see if he could do something, but the British
Oh yes.
let him?
Oh, you've got 2 or 3 chapters on the Duke of Windsor, or the King Edward VIII, as he was. King Edward VIII was forced to abdicate in December 1936. He was forced to abdicate, not really because of marrying an American divorcee, Mrs. Simpson. He was forced to abdicate basically because he was too pro-German for the likings of the British Foreign Office. He was secretly dealing with the German ambassador, Hirsch, and I've quoted bits of that in this book. In 1940, when he was in France, the Germans invaded France. The Duke of Windsor then took refuge in Spain, and then subsequently in Portugal. And Winston Churchill, who had by that time become Prime Minister, learned from code breaking the things that the Duke was saying to the Italian ambassador, the Spanish government, and to the German ambassador in Madrid and Lisbon, because Churchill was reading the telegrams these people were sending. He was just decoding them. You see, code breaking is the whole secret of what Churchill was up to. And Churchill sent a Scotland Yard detective with an armed revolver to Lisbon to instruct the Duke to board the ship which was going to take him out of harm's way to the Bahamas, and with orders to shoot him if he didn't. A lot of the papers on the Duke of Windsor are closed. In British files, you can't see them, but if you know the Italian archives and the Spanish archives, you can see the telegrams that Churchill was reading. So you can fill in the picture. If you do the work, you see, I found the Italian archives in Rome, in the Italian Foreign Office archives, and the bundles of telegrams I was reading had never been opened by anyone else, because as I opened the bundles, they actually fell apart in my hands. They were so ancient, and the string just crumbled away. I was the first and last person to read those telegrams. But I've got them on microfilm, and I've used them in this book. Yes. Yes.
Would you comment on the book by the British physician for the effect that Rudolf Hess now was not real?
Would I comment on the book by Hugh Thomas, the British physician in Spandau, called The Murder of Rudolf Hess, where he makes the allegation that at some time the real Rudolf Hess had been switched for an impostor. It's a very clever book, and I've got to take my hat off to an author who can maintain this right the way through a book, because it's such an improbable story, and on the face of it unlikely, because why should anybody have done that? What was the point of it? And why should anybody have then sat on in Spandau for 47 years, including 27 years in solitary confinement, if he wasn't the real man? He'd have to be nuts. I did investigate it. I got hold of from these American records I was referring to earlier. I found that they included Rudolf Hess's 1941 dental chart, you know, a chart of his mouth, his upper and lower jaw. And that is absolute 100% identification evidence, for example, in plane crashes. So I sent a photocopy of that dental chart to Spandau prison earlier this year, and I asked the Allied authorities, each of them, French, Russian, British, and American, to compare that with the dental chart of their prisoner, Rudolf Hess, and give me their comments. The British refused to comment. The Americans replied finally in July this year, a month before Rudolf Hess died. The colonel of the American Army Dental Corps, who is in fact the colonel who personally treats Rudolf Hess, said that he wanted to comment, but he had been instructed by the governors of Spandau prison that I am not permitted to impart any information to you concerning the dental records of prisoner number 7. It's as bad as that. And of course, 1 year later, prisoner number 7 died. So we can only speculate. My own view is that it's admittedly mysterious, because the personnel file of Hess does show that he was wounded in the left lung in 1917 in July, a rifle bullet, and yet there's no evidence of such an injury in the lung of the man as X-rayed in Britain and in Spandau. But I think there must be some other simple explanation. Possibly he was even faking his World War I injury. It's as simple as that. And also I've got the handwriting all the way through from 1920 onwards, right through to the 1950s, and there's not the slightest change in the handwriting. And the British records that I refer to, the ones I found in America, include a minute-by-minute, day-by-day account of everything that Rudolf Hess is doing, eating, saying, all his personal bodily emotions, everything. 2,000 pages of it. There's not a single gap, so there couldn't have been a switch.
You also comment on the book by the American Army officer, jailer for a while, I think the name is
Colonel Eugene Byrd. Colonel Eugene Byrd, who now lives in Berlin, was the commandant in Spandau. He wrote a book in conjunction with an Australian writer called Desmond Zwar on Rudolf Hess, and called Prisoner Number 7, I think. And that was published a few years back. Eugene Byrd was dismissed from the American Army for having betrayed information that he had gained as commandant of Spandau. Zwar took refuge in Cairns in the Northern Territories of Australia, and that is all that can be said about that. I've read the book. It's interesting because it contains some of the diaries of Rudolf Hess that he wrote in Spandau and in Nuremberg. And oddly enough, a man turned up in England a few months ago and showed me the original diaries and asked for a huge sum of money for them, and also had 7 tape recordings of Rudolf Hess, which had been made in his cell in Spandau quite recently. And I listened to the tape recordings, and it's quite an eerie experience to hear this man talking.
Do you think the paper authentic?
Oh, it is, yes. No question. Somebody at the back there.
Comment on the case of
Tyler Kent, the case of Tyler Kent. In fact, there was a very good article on Tyler Kent in the Journal of the Institute of Historical Review about a year ago. Tyler Kent was an American cipher clerk in the American Embassy in London in 1940. He'd previously been in Moscow, a very junior cipher clerk. He took to reading the messages passing through his hands and found to his astonishment in early 1940 that a very junior British minister, the Minister of the Navy, namely Winston Churchill, the First Lord of the Admiralty, was privately corresponding with President Roosevelt using the American Embassy in London as his channel. And Tyler Kent considered that this was evidence of a breach of neutrality by President Roosevelt, and he decided to make these telegrams available to British members of Parliament, including Captain Ramsay, who was subsequently locked up, and also to members of Congress. But before he could do this, Scotland Yard pounced. They'd been intercepting his telephone calls, and on May the 21st, 1940, Tyler Kent was arrested. The whole of the British file on this is in the archives in Suitland, Maryland, where I photocopied it. So I had the whole of the file on that. Since I photocopied it, the British government has requested that file to be closed again, so you can no longer see it. So if you want to see it, come and see me in London. I've got it. Yes.
Could you comment on the German nerve gas and why it was never used?
Well, this is a very good question. Somebody was saying to me on television in Australia only a few days ago, it's quite obvious, Mr. Irving, that if the war had continued, Adolf Hitler would have had the atom bomb, and we can only assume there's no reason at all that he wouldn't have used it. So I said, there's a perfectly good reason that he didn't use it, why he wouldn't use it. And he said, why? The man was a madman. He would have used whatever weapon he got his hands on. So I said, are you aware that the Germans, by the end of World War II, had manufactured 30,000 tons of nerve gas, sarin and tabun, which are the nerve gases now used by the Soviets in Angola, for example. And he said, well, I heard about it. So I said, well, think about it. 30,000 tons of nerve gases that would have penetrated any British or American gas mask. If Hitler had given the order for that to be used, he could have wiped out the bridgehead in Normandy. He could have pulled out his armored divisions and sent them against Russia. He could have won the war, effectively. But Hitler had repeatedly said from 1940 onwards, I refuse to be the first to use poison gases. Now, how does this jibe with your picture of Adolf Hitler? And this, of course, is the kind of logical question that they are just not equipped to answer. They're so familiar with the Hollywood Madison Avenue version of Hitler that they cannot find an answer to that question. How do we explain that Adolf Hitler, as we know him, refused to use the weapon which would have won the war? The answer is because, as Hitler himself said, we have signed the Geneva Convention that we will not be the first to use it. Winston Churchill, on July the 6th, 1944, in a drunken cabinet meeting, we know he was drunk from the private diary of the Chief of Naval Staff, Admiral Cunningham, ordered the use of poison gas against the Germans in Normandy, confidently thinking that we British had poison gas and that the Germans couldn't use it because they didn't have an air force. Well, the answer is that if we had used poison gas in Normandy in response to Churchill's order on July the 6th, 1944, Hitler would then have felt free to use nerve gases and it might have turned the war. This is all in volume 2 of the book. You'll find the whole of the unknown story of the poison gases.
I have one more question.
Did your research uncover any connection between the House of Rothschild and the Jewish International Bank and the creation of these wars?
The House of Rothschild and the Jewish International Bankers and the creation of these wars. The only research that I've discovered about Rothschild is connected with various stocks and shares that they held in the Wittkowitz Iron and Steel Works, which plays an extraordinary role in the middle of Europe at that time. And the Nazis wanted the iron and steel works, and they were busy buying up all the shares, and then they got their hands on this particular Baron Rothschild in Austria, and they held him hostage to persuade the Rothschild family to release the remaining shares and so on. It's an international family, of course. It isn't just one family. It has many nationalities. It turns up in many, many guises. And they are wealthy beyond belief. They are rich beyond the dreams of avarice. And people who have more money than they know is good for them are very dangerous indeed. One mustn't underestimate their ability to influence people, opinions, and events. But more than that, I'm not really prepared to say because I haven't researched the House of Rothschild, just as I haven't researched the Holocaust. So,
Do you plan to do that in the future?
no, because I am not tired of life.
All right, thank you.